Welcome to your in-depth weekly horoscope for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose, the Moon too. I'm going to give you an overview of what we can all collectively expect this week, but please stay with me. I will explore each of the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces. If you're new to my channel, it's great to have your company. If you're a returning visitor, thank you so much for joining me. Your likes, shares, comments and subscriptions are all gratefully appreciated. Now, if you'd like to get your free natal horoscope, you can do that now from me by clicking on the link beneath this video. This is going to give you an understanding of the Sun, the Moon, and also the Ascendant influences and all the aspects, the angles that are forged to other key players. And that's entirely free. Please see the link below. So this week begins with the energy of last week's new moon very much to the fore still. Now that's a new moon in Pisces that asks us to get more in touch with the feeling dimension. So it's not necessarily about tangible things, it's more about those sensory energies. But Uranus was in the mix, so the combination of those two things is asking us over the next month to listen to our hunches, but also be open to try some fresh approaches. The problem at the end of last week was that Mercury merged with Neptune, a very sensitive alliance, and created some distortion. Also, Mars and Uranus were in a stormy right angle, which peaked on Saturday, but they're still in touch as we come into this new week. You may have experienced a situation where someone had a real strong viewpoint around a money matter, a point of principle, or it could have been around a friendship, and the energy from that may still be pouring into this week. However, Mercury's confusing link with Neptune certainly didn't help. It created some potential for distortion. So Mercury then moved into Aries, and as we begin this new week, is in a very penetrative but powerful and passionate and fiery, because now Aries is the host for Mercury, but with Pluto in the more strategic Aquarius. So if something did seem a little bit confusing, we have a chance to rethink it, drill down into the details and get a clearer feel for what it may be about. But Venus moves on Monday into Pisces, where she is exalted, and is going to be there through to April the 5th. If you're someone with a natural appreciation of the arts, of culture, of food, and exploring different ways of doing things, Venus in this area is really enchanting. One thing Venus can do in the 12th house for us all collectively is just give us food for thought about relationships. The tension, the abrasion of Mars square Uranus may have seen some fiery moments, so it could be a good time to just really reflect, and that reflection gets stronger, that reflection potential as this week goes on, as the Sun combines with Neptune, and we have a cazimi which occurs on Sunday. Now, one of the interesting symbolic parts of the Sun combining with Neptune is the Sun is actually coming to the end of its journey right around the heavens, and is set to join back up with Aries and begin the whole celestial process next week on Tuesday, on the 20th. So ironically, the Sun may be at its most bereft of neat vitality as we get to the end of this week. And because there is a quarter moon on Sunday in Gemini, the square between that, the Sun, and also Neptune suggests we can be really hypersensitive to any stimuli or information, or particularly gossip, if I'm honest, that won't be so good for our soul. So as the week draws to a close, I think for us all it is a time to just hunker down a little bit and just think, what has that previous year of the journey of the Sun through the sky meant for us? Have some time out. If we can get into nature, by the sea, by a river, do something that is very calming and peaceful. That's going to be a good thing to do at the end of the week. But also just keep your guard up from anyone who tends to sort of be a bit aggravating or irritating. if social media, for example, can test your patience at times, and I think it does for most of us, probably a good time to have a few days off of it. But all of that's preparing us for the sun to surge into the sign of Aries in the week following this one, join up with Mercury, and we have an exciting vista developing before us with, of course, that stunning total solar eclipse soon to follow in April. If you would like to ascend above this zodiac broadcast and understand more serious astrology, check out my special chart offer. You can get your forecast and your character analysis for 30% off, searing insights totally unique to you. Please see the link beneath this video for more. Welcome Aries to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, and if you choose, the Moon too. So on the screen now you can see your chart wheel for this week. Let's check out your ruler Mars. That's always important to do. And he's up there in house 11, which can be very much to do with social interaction, friendliness. And Venus is pretty close by, and Pluto's in that area of your situation too. But you know, Mars is clashing with Uranus. So you can see Uranus down there in house 2. House 2 is our values, our everyday money, but also our self-worth. I think as you come into this week, there may be a friend or some kind of connection you have where it has been quite tense. Maybe you are feeling a little bit rebellious about how you use your resources, but it's possible that there may be a divergence between how you see something and how that other person does, or that group of people does too. Now, because you've got Mercury having just joined in your sign, Mercury in your sign is very quick and hot, inclined to make much more impulsive decisions, but it's being anchored in a positive way by Pluto up there above Mars in the sign of Aquarius. And that gives you an opportunity to use your powers of analysis. Now, the sign of Aquarius for you is very much about future planning. So as much as something may have been a bit turbulent, or there may have been an issue of trust and insincerity or even dishonesty that you experienced towards the end of last week as Mercury merged with Neptune, and then we had the new moon, I think it is possible that as you come into this new week, you can see that the moon is right on the anaretic point as we enter Monday, but it's just about to move into your sign. So immediately it's connecting with Mercury. So if you have felt on the end of something, if you felt that someone's not been very upfront, or you felt in some ways excluded, very quickly you're going to move into feeling in the present, and that can be very valuable to you. Also worth noting that the North Node and Chiron do retain their unity through to the end of March. Okay, it's no longer exact, but they are very close together. So almost immediately on Monday you get 4 planets in your sign, so a chance to take greater control. So I feel last week's new moon for you is very valuable if you are someone who's been a little bit reluctant to look at the more psychological side of your nature or your situation. But equally, what may have happened is that a situation occurred where you've been surprised or blindsided, or perhaps your own lack of clarity about a situation has left you a little bit unsure, and maybe you are feeling quite fiery as you come into this new week because of Mars in that right angle with Uranus. However, that moon moving quickly and swiftly to join up with Mercury gives you a chance to think quickly, to recalibrate. And the key thing to tell you is that as this week draws on, the Sun is going to be combining with Neptune, and there could be like a repeat of last week's energy in terms of Mercury applying to Neptune. But this time I feel you've learned a lot of lessons, particularly about trust and who you can really rely on. Or if you've been resisting looking at some vulnerabilities, really somehow or another something happened which may have made you much more conscious that you do have them, because we all have them. But by the end of this week, when we have that quarter moon in Gemini, which is very quick moving and speedy, I think also this can help you to start pushing back a little bit in terms of any situation where you feel there has been some undermining of you, where not necessarily someone's told you straight up to your face what the problem is. So if there's been an absence of physical vitality, you felt overwhelmed, you felt very sensitive, you felt your emotions were very turbulent and maybe on the edge of actually losing your temper at times. As you come into this week, I feel you are going to gain more control. And what last week has done, and the new moon is pushing you to do, is to be much more conscious of the need not to ignore anything which is the more difficult part of ourselves and life and other people. But certainly trust is an important issue at the present time, particularly with Saturn in the 12th house for you. So by the end of this week, you may be quite happy to just chill out a little bit, but it's all preparing you for that new, explosive new beginning in the following week when the Sun returns to your sign. We have the spring equinox, and it really becomes Aries time. Welcome Taurus to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose, the Moon too. On the screen now you can see your chart wheel, and we need to focus on your ruler Venus, because right at the start of this week she moves into a new home, the sign of Pisces, where she loves to be. Now through to the 4th of March this can be terrific for your social interactions. Now, of course, we did have a new moon in that area last week, a new moon which linked to Uranus in your sign. So perhaps the combination of these two influences is suggesting a possibility of some fresh people developing, or fresh relationships developing in your situation, which is really exciting. The other thing I like about Venus in the 11th house is it gives us a reminder to celebrate the things we have in common in our relationships, not just the things that make us different. But even though there was that new moon late last week, there was also a very turbulent right angle between Uranus in your sign and also Mars in the part of your situation to do with your interface with the wider world. Did you have some kind of clash at the end of last week? Or is there something that's happened over the weekend that's left you on edge? Maybe it is to do with a professional matter. If you feel that in some way your desire to manifest your talents and assert yourself is being resisted because your employer or a partner or family members are not quite seeing that you want to be a little bit more radical in your approach, perhaps you yourself are resisting trying a more radical approach, but that tension between Mars and Uranus is still prevalent over the first few days of this week. However, it is true that the moon moves quickly at the start of this week into your 12th house, where it joins up with Mercury, which moved into this area late last week. Mercury's forging a very positive angle to Pluto, and one of the great attributes of this combination is that Mercury in the 12th house can give us the opportunity to think about the psychological dimension in a more accepting way. Now, Mercury in Aries is a very hot, fiery energy, so it can be a little bit impatient. But with having the combination, the healing combination of the North Node and Chiron so close together, and they're going to be in touch with one another for the whole of March, I feel there is a chance for you to think about some maybe tender issues, tender strands that have not necessarily received quite as much nurture as they could. Now, we all have stuff, you know, that may be more recent or it may be more historic. And I think Mercury moving into this area could stir some of that up a little bit. But the angle with Pluto suggests that there may be somebody that you know who is able to give you some pointers or guidance, but in a very non-judgmental way. This person may be someone who knows you well or doesn't know you at all. But if there has been that turbulence over the weekend, do be open to some outside inputs, because I think that can be very useful to you. Now, as this week goes on, the Sun starts to advance towards Neptune. In a symbolic sense, this is really interesting because it's almost like the Sun is dying at this part of its cycle of the year. And so therefore, being near Neptune, which can dissipate and just basically dissolve energy. So there could be for us all collectively a lessening of drive as the week draws to a close. But for you, I think it can make you much more conscious of the friends you can hang out with who are very caring and sensitive and supportive. And if there is anyone harsh or brittle around you, you may want to steer it a little bit clear. The quartermoon, which occurs on Sunday for you, is the 11th and 2nd square. So if there are friends, for example, or associates you've got that have different value systems to you, they could be revealed. But of course, Neptune can distort. It's not necessarily great for seeing things in a very clear, factual way. So if there is something big you're thinking around a group involvement or around your long-term planning, which the 11th house is about, vital on that quarter moon and with Neptune in the mix, not to rush to any judgments. And that's where all that 12th house energy with Mercury, the node, and Chiron can be very helpful to you at the moment, as long as you're not hung up about looking at some vulnerabilities. If you are someone who finds the shadow side of life a little bit challenging, try to just reassure yourself it's part of all of us. The human state is not designed to be completely perfect and functional in an absolute way all the time. We're going to have ups and downs, and the more you can be philosophical and at peace with that, the better things will be. But I feel around your social situation, around your contacts to others, there's definitely a window of opportunity, but it needs to be with the right people and for the right reasons. Welcome, Gemini, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or the Moon if you choose to. On the screen now, you can see your chart wheel for this week. The big takeout is that your ruling planet Mercury has relocated into the hot sign of Aries. Very much about passion and can be very direct and quick moving here, but it's forging a brilliant angle to Pluto. So Pluto for you is in the part of your situation to do with knowledge, higher ideals, can be to do with travel. And this is a really very, very invigorating connection. If you do need to think about something carefully or express yourself with conviction, you can really get to the core of what the matter is in a very, very sharp way. But of course, last week, Mercury applied to Neptune, and that may have created some confusion, particularly around your professional situation. Maybe you reached out to somebody or were waiting to hear some information back and it didn't quite materialize. Also because Uranus in your 12th house, which is very psychological, was clashing with Mars in the 9th, very much to do with your principles. If someone has played games or not being very upfront, this may have made your blood boil. And there could be a little bit of that still coming into this new week because they are still in touch. It's just that, of course, we had the new moon last week, and that does give you an opportunity to really go for it around goals and ambitions over the next month. But because Venus today at the start of this week moves into the sign of Pisces, it's suggesting that as much as drive, passion and determination can be very important, charm and the ability to network can also be critical too, right through to the 4th of April. So Venus moving into that area brings a little bit of a different dimension for sure. Venus also loves being in the sign of Pisces. And the other takeout for this week is that soon enough the moon, you can see it on the screen, it's at 29 degrees and 47, but it's very quickly going to apply to Mercury in your sign. So even if there has been a little bit of uncertainty about what goals or ambitions or what approach to take, I think you're going to be sorting it out quite quickly. Now later this week, the Sun applies to Neptune. In a symbolic sense, We could say that the Sun is coming to the end of its journey through the whole cycle, which it is, and therefore being very close to Neptune, which can be very draining but very dissipating, means that when it comes to those worldly interactions and goals and responsibilities and obligations, you may feel very sensitive, or you could be inspired. Welcome Cancer to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or the Moon if you choose to. Now, late last week we had that very powerful new moon in your sister water sign of Pisces, and that energy is cascading into this week as it begins. So on the screen now you can see the moon is just right at the end of Pisces at 29 degrees and 47 minutes. But over the weekend, Mercury, the planet of communication, moved into a very prominent part of your chart, the 10th house. But it had been affected potentially by Neptune late last week. So if you did feel a bit confused about some details, or a contractual matter felt rather opaque and it wasn't easy to get clarity, and this created some frustration, it wouldn't be a complete surprise, to be honest, because Mars and Uranus were in a very tense right angle on Friday last week, and they are in touch as you come into this new week. Mars is in the part of your situation to do with how you connect to others in a very deep way, but it can be about shared finance. If you see a shared finance or business situation very differently to someone else, that may still be a factor as this new week begins. But the great news is the Venus is going to be moving later on Monday into the sign of Pisces, where she loves to be. She's exalted there. And if you have been thinking about planning a travel, a trip, or you're wanting to expand your horizons in some way, Venus is going to give you a real appreciation of anything you do in a very enriching way. So whether it's through cuisine or culture or even clothes and fashions, it can be very positive for you through to the 4th of April. But Mercury, having moved on, has gone into a very authoritative part of your scope. So if you felt mucked around last week, Mercury's giving you the chance to just pause, gather your thoughts, and in its link with Pluto, be very decisive in what you say. So if last week came to a close with a desire to do something different and some excitement, but at the same time there was an issue that was a little bit challenging or frustrating, as you come into this new week, there is the astral tools to sort it out. Now, as the week goes on, the Sun does apply to Neptune. It comes into a cazimi on Sunday, but they're both in a square with the quartermoon. And that quartermoon occurs in your 12th house. This does require a little bit of care, because if you think about it symbolically, the Sun going through to the end of its journey in Pisces but connecting to Neptune can take away some of the furnace of its energy. Neptune can add sensitivity and compassion, and you could find yourself almost by osmosis downloading lots of different ideas in a very positive way. But the square with the quartermoon suggests that whatever you're feeling and however you're feeling, whether it's on top form or very sensitive, it's going to be turned up to max. And if you are feeling a little rawer and more vulnerable, part of the thing to understand is that the quartermoon in your 12th house can trigger insecurities and vulnerabilities. So possibly best to stay away from people that you find a little bit challenging as this week draws to a close. But the fact that the moon will soon move at the start of this week to join up with Mercury in the part of your situation to do with authority, if there was something that was a little bit confusing or frustrating or annoying at the end of last week, despite the beauty of that new moon, you are going to find the ways to navigate that better this week. And I feel that Venus can really be an asset for you over the next few weeks. Not least that Venus in the 9th house is all about being a truth seeker. So if there has been some confusion around a love relationship, even if the Sun applying to Neptune can create yet more uncertainty, Venus is still going to be there, encouraging you to be patient but persistent in getting some clarity on what's really important to you. Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or the Moon, if you should choose. On the screen now, I'm showing your chart wheel for the week. The big takeout is that we're surfing the energy of last week's new moon, which for you occurred in House 8, very much about transformations. But the Sun and the Moon linked to Uranus, which can be an unsettling influence, but the combination is saying to you that wherever you're most invested, whether it's emotionally, in terms of your passions, in terms of business, Uranus is saying be as open-minded as possible because some flexing and fresh approaches may work very well. But the 8th house can also be where we're getting closer and more involved with someone as much as we're also preparing to leave. So it's a very transient type of influence. And within the chart wheel, we can see that Venus is just at the end of Aquarius, but later on Monday does move into the sign of Pisces, where it's actually exalted. It loves being there. And if something was proving a bit frustrating late last week because of Mercury's application to Neptune, which may have meant you may have found it difficult to get really precise information or a clear and clean fix about something, or because Mars and Uranus were in such a turbulent, tense right angle, and they are through to the middle of this week, to be honest, what Venus moving into the 8th house does is really asks a big question. Are you ready to take that next step of commitment, whether it is around a financial or a romantic matter, or do you need to just have more time to work things through? And because Mars in your opposite sign is making you a little bit wary about pitching in too easily, and it is in that right angle to Uranus in your world, the world part of your chart, quite rightly, you're just being a bit edgy about where you're giving yourself or not. But Venus is kind of a gentle, beguiling influence, and it's going to say to you through to the 4th of April, look, there are great possibilities, but obviously things have to feel right. Now, as this week goes on, the Sun speeds up and connects to Neptune in a way that Mercury did last week. Now, if you are thinking about what to do with your finances, what Neptune can do is make us very idealistic, but it also can distort things a little bit. So the 8th house is a critical area, particularly financial planning. So with Neptune in the mix at this point, if you can get some great advice, do. And what's going to help you this week is that over last weekend, Mercury, the planet of communication, moved into your sister fire sign of Aries. And you can see it's actually forging an amazing link to Pluto. So someone can give you some very crisp, to the point and earnest advice this week, which you can find to be very valuable. Mercury being in Aries is actually really exciting. If you are wanting to break out and be a bit more adventurous, you're going to find that that will really help, but you're really going to get your green light for when the Sun returns to Aries on the 20th of March. And the year will really start to be a lot more exciting from that point. But if you just are a little bit unsure of certain things in your situation, whether it's romantically or financially, I think Mercury moving into that area makes it a good time to get some good advice or do some reading and some research, because the link to Pluto is very penetrative. So if there has been a little bit of confusion, they can cut through. And I think Venus moving into your 8th can give you a bit more confidence to try to take a relationship forwards if you are really drawn to someone. But equally, of course, if you're really not sure, with Mars and Uranus continuing their very abrasive right angle, you may want to just sit on your hands and wait to see how things develop until later in this month. Welcome, Virgo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the ascendant, and if you choose, the moon too. Now this week begins with a super important event, and that is that Venus is going to make the transition from a very practical part of your situation into your sector of relating. So on the screen now you can see that Venus is just nestling at 28 degrees and 52 minutes in Aquarius, but it's going to move into Pisces on Monday. Now Venus loves being in Pisces, it's exalted here, but of course this comes on top of last week's new moon in this sign, which linked brilliantly to Uranus. Uranus is the planet of surprises, it's provocative, it's not always easy, so the link between the new moon and Uranus, whatever relationships we're talking about, has asked you over the next month to try to find fresh approaches. That could be just sharpening up your listening skills, connecting with people who in the past may not have been your cup of tea. Being more open-minded is a big part of Uranus's great qualities. But Venus moving into this area is one of the most fortunate transits of the whole year. And it's going to be in this in the sign of Pisces through to the 4th of April. So whatever your romantic status, and whatever the type of connections you have with others, there is a chance to find and achieve greater harmony. But that may not have seemed possible last week when Mercury, your ruler, applied to Neptune and something may have felt as clear as mud. And also Mars and Uranus were in a very stormy right angle, and that actually is still in place the first couple of days of this week. And part of the discussion may have been around who does and contributes what, particularly if you have been feeling rather taken for granted. So you may have really made your point as last week came to a close, but in a way the 7th house isn't about just relating, it's about setting our boundaries. Because essentially what we want for a good relationship is a good balance between what we give but what we need and get back, so that both sides of the equation feel respected, appreciated, and it's inclusive, but we can also be true to ourselves. So Venus comes along to calm, it's like a healing balm to some of that tension that may have cropped up late last week. It does depend on your unique situation, of course. But certainly what Venus in the 7th house does is enable us to have clearer dialogue and to try to reach consensus, and most of all celebrate the things we have in common. Now later in the week for you, the Sun is going to be connecting to Neptune in a way like Mercury did last week. But Mercury doesn't like being in the sign of Pisces. The Sun's fine. And for you, there may be a conversation you have towards the end of this week which is quite peaceful, and you could come to a point of understanding. It may be with a colleague, could be with a housemate, family member. It doesn't have to be in a romantic context. But I feel Venus being in your 7th house along with the Sun and Neptune just brings a more gentle vibration to bear, whereas late last week I felt it was a bit confusing and very intense and very potentially abrasive. But there is a quarter moon as the week draws to a close that does clash with the Neptune cazimi that occurs on the Sunday. So what does this mean? Well, it's going to be in your sister mutable sign of Gemini, which like you shares the Mercury rulership. It means that your feelings are going to be quite close to the surface. So when it comes to a relationship matter, particularly if someone who has a role of authority in your life, it could be a parent, for example, but it may be a boss. But someone could make a comment about your situation around a relationship, or not quite see how things have unfolded, and actually it could really be very, very irritating. So just try to keep a sense of equilibrium, because I feel as this week goes on, the potential for greater harmony, cooperation, collaboration and understanding are all very strong. And if you are single but you would like to meet somebody in a relationship, and get to know somebody new, the next 3 or 4 weeks can really be a very positive time for you. Welcome Libra to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose, the Moon. On the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart for you for as this week begins. The big standout, I feel, is that Mercury, the planet of communication, has moved into your opposite sign. Now, Mercury last week merged with Neptune in a way which may have really affected your energy. So if you did feel a little bit lacking in motivation, not really having as much drive as you would like, that wouldn't have been a complete surprise. But also there may have been something that you were feeling quite fiery about, because Mars and Uranus were in a square which came into an exact 90-degree angle on Saturday. And Mars being in your 5th house is where you're really feeling passionate. You've had Venus, your ruler, there as well. But Uranus in the 8th house has meant that if it hasn't been easy to get recognition for your ideas, for your talents, that sense of frustration may have then been feeding in to the listlessness that the combination of Mercury and I feel Neptune had. But Mercury's now moved into your opposite sign, and that can help you to be a bit more detached about some of the frustrations. It also forges a great link to Pluto. That combination can see you think in a very penetrative way, but also express yourself with greater clarity. Also, Venus, your ruler, coming to the end of its journey through Aquarius, moves on Monday the 11th into Pisces. But the key here is that Venus loves being in Pisces, and it suggests that even if you've done a lot of giving with Neptune in Pisces since 2012, and then that's seemed oppressive since last year with Saturn's arrival on March the 7th, Venus moving here just reminds you that in some situations you are at your best when you are being given. And the fact that Mercury is on your 7th house can help you to actually tell people about what you're prepared to collaborate and cooperate with, but also help you to reinforce your boundaries. So that's good. It is a fact, though, that Mars and Uranus came into an exact square on Saturday last week. And if you had been feeling really a sense of unbridled frustration with how things hadn't been developing as quickly as you would like, there could be a bit of that hanging around at the start of this week. No matter, as this week draws on, the Sun advances forwards and connects to Neptune. Now, in terms of the symbolism of the zodiac, the Sun's getting to the very end of its journey through its entire circuit. So when it returns to Aries on the 20th of March, that's a new beginning for all of us. But for you, it's a great new beginning for your relationship. So I feel this week may be a little bit more juggling about deciding where you need to be helpful and assisting to others, and where you may need to set your boundary. You may still not have an enormous amount of physical vitality, to be honest. And by the end of the week, the quartermoon, which squares up with the Neptune Cazimi on Sunday, really is a marker in the sand, and you could find yourself feeling a sense of drain if there is too much of a give and you're not having enough time to embrace your freedom. So that may be something you do need to consider as this week draws to a close. But the new moon in Pisces was asking you to get stronger in terms of the changes to your diet, health and fitness that you can adjust by a fresh approach because of the innovation of Uranus applying to that new moon. Venus coming along saying, look, there are some situations you do need to perhaps be sacrificing around, but the relationships which you have felt totally unconsidered and unheard in, they're the ones that may have created the greatest sense of exhaustion. And so it's just finding the right pivot between not stopping helping people in general, but being a little bit more astute in what situations you're going to give to and which you need to give to yourself. And that's really the story of this week for you. Welcome Scorpio, it's your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart for as we start this week. Now the big takeout is that energy in the sign of Pisces, which for you shares your water triplicity, and house 5 is where we can dazzle people with the strength of our personality, our enthusiasm, but also it can be where we have fun and we socialise. Now you've got Venus, the planet of relating, is joining in this sector right at the start of this week. In the wheel on the screen, you can see Venus is just coming to the end of its journey in Aquarius, but it moves into Pisces on Monday. Its journey through Aquarius is perhaps giving you the chance to make some home improvements, to beautify your abode, perhaps through some redecoration. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you've probably really enjoyed your garden and your immediate environment. But Venus moving into the 5th house is awesome. It's there through to the 4th of April. And it can suggest that there's going to be a more flirty and playful vibe coming in on top of that already very, very positive new moon, which of course linked to Uranus in your sector of relating. Uranus is a restless, sometimes provocative influence. It's just suggesting when it comes to enjoying life, maybe you do need to be open to different people and different approaches. But the other big thing that happened over the weekend was that Mercury moved on from its rather tricky conjunction with Neptune and darted into the sign of Aries, which, like you, shares a Mars rulership. And Mercury forges a very positive link to Pluto, your modern ruler, as this week begins. However, Mars, your traditional ruler, was in a very highly charged right angle with Uranus, which came into a peak on Saturday last week. And if in a close personal relationship, things have not been easy, or there's been some tensions, or what you want and what they want really isn't the same, there could have been some real clashes of will. And there is the potential for that a little bit at the start of this week. However, the good news is that as the week goes on, Venus's magic in Pisces is that it does bring the gracefulness of Venus to bear in a very positive way. And sometimes the tensions that are created can be changed just by a shift in atmosphere. And Venus can help that because of its diplomacy. But as the week goes on, the Sun then starts supplying to Neptune. In a symbolic sense, the Sun is coming to the end of its journey through the entire heavens, preparing for when we start the new astrological year on the spring equinox. So we're very close to that point. So the Sun combining with Neptune for you in house 5 is brilliant for tapping into your imagination. It is excellent if you have artistic or creative skills that you want to express. Probably isn't quite so good for sheer raw power. So you may have a little bit less energy as the week develops. But then the Sun connects in a quincunx with Neptune, and then we have a quarter moon with that position with the moon in Gemini. Now the moon in Gemini for you is house 8, so we have a 5/8 energy. If there is somebody around you who tends to be a bit jealous or a bit clinging, could be a close relationship that you're in at the present time, that may be a bit of an issue with this quarter moon, and maybe that's what Uranus is about. Part of you wants to be connected to someone, but also you're wanting your own space. That's one dynamic. It could be that you're single and you're attracted to someone but not ready to be totally committed, but the other person wants you to be more available. Then again, it could be that a relationship that you're in is just you're seeing things in very different ways, and that could be to do with children if you have them by the end of this week. So there is the potential for some complexities later in the week, but when it comes to just being really all in with where you can demonstrate your talents, your joyfulness, your enthusiasm, even your playfulness, this week has a lot to recommend it. It's just dealing with that early edgy tension between Uranus and Mars, which has affected a lot of people, I feel, as last week came to a close and this one begins. And it's just, we're being asked to just chill out a little bit, but the Sun merging with Neptune later in the week should bring a more gentle, sensitive vibe to bear to help you to do that. Welcome Sagittarius to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, and if you choose, the Moon too. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart for when the week begins. The big takeout is that Mercury, the planet of communication, has darted into your sister fire sign of Aries. That's really welcome because last week it was combining with Neptune, and you may have found in the last few days of last week that your emotional energy felt very depleted. Things that usually you may have shrugged off may have been really quite draining, and also because Mars and Uranus were in such an intense right angle, which came into an exact square on Saturday, you may have felt quite aggravated and stressed out with some of those emotions that were there. So Mercury moving into your 5th house is an opportunity to bring some levity, some playfulness, because Mercury in the 4th house is, it's very, very difficult to stop ideas going around our mind. It's quite inward. It's not a very outgoing influence for a planet which is very much to do with the message. So the messenger moves into a much more elementally positive area for you. So some of that frustration at the end of last week can make way. Now Mercury is also forging a terrific link as the week begins with Pluto. So you can be sure that this week gives you a chance to articulate yourself with a lot of passion and a lot more clarity, because Pluto in your 3rd house is about everyday ideas, but it's your beliefs, but the enthusiasm that comes from Mercury in the 5th house, which is almost very Leonian, but with that fire. So you're going to be much more on form as this week begins. But the energy of the new moon in your sector of home, emotion, family, feelings is still percolating into this new week, but that forged an angle to Uranus. But that wasn't a bad angle. It's kind of saying that if you can change things up at home to create more space, Uranus, declutter, Uranus back to the Sun and the Moon in the 4th house, along with Neptune and Saturn, of how it feels, but how your home is structured, then some fresh approaches to your home can make you feel better too. But as this week begins, you can see from the wheel that Venus is just getting to the end of its journey through Aquarius, and on Monday the 11th it moves into to Pisces too. The difference is that as much as Mercury really hates being in Pisces, Venus thrives here. So its direct replacement, if you like, has an opportunity for you to bring some charm to your home. So if you have done some sorting out, moved things around, got rid of things you don't really need, what Venus can do now is help you to beautify it. So if you're looking to decorate or buy some new home furnishings, or if you're in the south to work on your garden, then in the southern hemisphere, then Venus is great for that. It can also be a good time to get together with family members as well. But Mars and Uranus are still just about in touch through to the middle of the week. So there could still be a little bit of a sense of too much energy and not knowing quite what to do with it, but then actually not having that much energy. So that kind of stuff. But then as the week goes on, the Sun applies to Neptune in a conjunction. There's a cazimi that occurs on Sunday, but it's a cazimi that squares up to the quartermoon in Gemini, your 7th house. So it means that there could be a little bit of confusion as this week draws to a close. Perhaps you could find yourself playing the peacemaker between two friends who aren't seeing eye to eye. Maybe you're unsure about exactly what you want around your emotional home life. Do you want to move? Do you want to add to the family? Do you want to downsize? Do you really want to buy that new kitchen in that colour? Or do you actually want to do something completely different with your money? So some of those questions could be playing around with that particular quarter moon, but then you have to relate it out to others. So the emotional part of your situation, which is coming from the Sun, as I mentioned, Venus at the start of this week, initially the Moon before it moves into Aries, Saturn and Neptune, all that fourth house energy is still very, very strong this week. But I feel that whereas the end of last week was very aggravating, very exhausting, I think the latter part of this week, you're going to feel that things are moving, but it's all preparing you for when the Sun thrusts into Aries on the 20th, and that's the start of the astrological year. But for you, it's brilliant because the fifth house, which the Sun in Aries is about, really is your time to get really moving forwards at quite a rapid pace. So at the moment, it is still about coming to terms with some feeling issues, some environmental issues, some family stuff, sorting things out a little bit, but you're just preparing the way for you to turn on the afterburner from the 20th of March. Welcome Capricorn to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose the Moon. On the screen now is the event chart for when you start this week. You can see there's a big cluster of energy in house 3, the sign of Pisces. And that's where we had the new moon right at the end of last week. So the energy of that is very strong as we go into this new week. The third house is your everyday interactions, siblings, neighbours, your community through the internet. It can be our tech itself, the actual hardware. Certainly it's how we think. It's very Gemini-like really. And ironically, of course, Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, has been in Pisces, but you'll see it has made way over the weekend and it's arrived in Aries. So that's the big change over the weekend. But the energy of the new moon is still very strong. But as we begin this week, Venus is going to make its way out of your second house, where it's given you a real appreciation of good food and good wine recently, and perhaps blessed you with some surprise, a surprise or two financially, and that's moving into Pisces. But Venus loves being in Pisces. Mercury that's left and gone into Aries really dislikes being in the sign of Pisces. And last week, Mercury got mangled by Neptune. So if you did feel a bit low in energy and spirits towards the end of last week, I think it wouldn't be a surprise. Your nervous system may have felt drained. And also Mars and Uranus were in a combative right angle, which peaked on Saturday. Now that's still ongoing as we come into this new week. What's the story behind that? Well, I feel if you have felt a bit more impulsive about spending money or having some treats, and someone close to you saw it in a different way, it may have created some real tensions. Maybe the tensions is just being within yourself. Then again, you could have found yourself really, really drawn towards someone and found them almost hard to resist, but also knowing that that person isn't necessarily the best person for you. So there has been a bit of that energy around. Now Venus moving into Pisces, it's a lovely transit. It loves being here. It's exalted. And Venus is going to bless your self-expression through to the 4th of April. Don't be surprised if someone is just really taken with your tone, your ideas. You could be talking to another friend and someone will just chime in and just really warm to you. But of course, Saturn has been your ruler in this area since March the 7th, 23. And it's possible that there have been a few times when your conversations with people have jarred a little bit or haven't flowed as you would like, or someone's taken something you said slightly the wrong way. There's a window opportunity now for communications to flow much more peacefully. But it doesn't change the fact that Mercury, the planet of communication, has moved into your 4th house, which can be an inward area for our thinking. It's just it's in the fire sign of Aries, and it actually forges an ace link to Pluto. So if you did want to do some deep thinking about where you live and how you live there, the connection of those two will see you cut right to the core of any matter very effectively. Now, as this week draws on, the Sun starts to apply to Neptune, repeating what Mercury did the week before. It's interesting because the sun's coming to the end of its entire journey through the sky, and it's going to move to the start of its journey on the 20th of March. This connection to Neptune could see you thinking, third house, about your philosophies. It could see you thinking about your creative interests. If you're someone who's really good at photography or writing, you could be absolutely brilliant towards the end of this week. So a great time to engage with those talents. Maybe you enjoy poetry. Maybe you're writing a book. If you are, you can be inspired with the sun applying to Neptune. It's just that physical vitality may be a little low. There is a quarter moon which occurs on Sunday, just when there is a Neptune cazimi, which squares up that cazimi. In the sign of Gemini, for you, that's the 6th house. So 6th, 3rd house is where we can get caught up in trying to be a bit too virtuous. And 3rd house energy is quite highly strung, and then we try to do too much and then we don't achieve very much at all. So if you are thinking of doing any do-it-yourself tasks as the week draws to a close, and I can absolutely guarantee that I won't be doing any do-it-yourself. If anyone asks me about do-it-yourself, I've got one answer: do it yourself. But as this week draws to a close, if you did find yourself tempted to clear up some domestic chores, don't give yourself an unending list. You know, just prioritise, because I do feel that your vitality will be a bit, you know, it could, if you focus on those more imaginative and creative things, I think you could have enough. But if you try to do too much, suddenly you could feel whoosh, a little bit bereft. But on the whole, a very positive week for you, Capricorn. Welcome, Aquarius, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose the Moon. On the screen now is the event chart at the start of the week, and you can see that you have 3 planets in your sign: Pluto, Mars and Venus. But Venus is going to be moving later on Monday into the sign of Pisces, and that is positively good news for you in particular. Why? Well, Venus loves being in Pisces. 1, it's exalted. 2, the creative stuff that you've been doing ever since the Sun on the 20th of January, followed by Pluto on the 21st, then Mercury, then of course you've had Venus and Mars, all in your sign. You've been doing a lot of creative stuff, but you may not have been seeing the results. Last week's new moon may have started to give you a bit more insight into where things were heading. And of course that linked brilliantly with your modern ruler Uranus, suggesting that when it comes to self-worth, 2nd house, the new moon, and also money, and also your values, Uranus is saying maybe you need to adapt things a little bit, and there needs to be some fresh approaches. Have you become a little bit too set in your way? And there needs to be some flexing and some innovation, something you often have an interest in. But there is a duality with Aquarius. One part of you likes to stick, the other likes to twist. You can be very progressive, but you also can be quite welded to particular ways of doing things, because that's the rulership of Saturn. The more progressive stuff comes from Uranus. So that new moon is a priming point for what you can achieve over the next month, but it requires a fresh pair of eyes to extract the most, either in terms of money or your sense of self-worth. But Venus moving out of your sign on Monday, the 11th, into Pisces, where it loves to be, is superb, because this usually is a trigger for an uptick in financial fortune. So whenever Venus moves into the 2nd solar house, it's usually very good. But for you, it's moving into a sign that it's exalted in. So that in itself is really, really encouraging. But particularly if you've done the hard yards. The problem is last week, Mercury, the planet of communication, which hates being in Pisces, was applying to Neptune, and that may have made you feel worthless, exhausted, if you're not really seeing things shaping up in an obvious, tangible way. And also a storming right angle between Mars and in your sign and Uranus in your fourth may have meant if you felt frustrated or pinned in and things aren't moving at the pace you want, the sense of exasperation may have been enormous. But then, because of Mercury applying to Neptune, you may not have quite had the wherewithal to find the traction to move forwards. So that has been uncomfortable. So as we come into this week, Mercury has darted forwards into the effervescent, energized, vibrant Aries. It may also see you do well because it's linking to Pluto in your sign. So if you are someone who has got big ideas and a real passion about what you want to do, you can really start to articulate it from the start of this new week in a way which seemed a bit beyond you last week. But Mars and Uranus are still in a right angle. If there is anyone playing games around you, you're not in the mood for it, to be honest. Later on in this week, the Sun applies to Neptune and we have a cazimi on Sunday, a Neptune cazimi, squared up by the quartermoon in your sister air sign of Gemini. What does that mean? Well, a second 5 right angle suggests that we could be too generous to the wrong person, too frivolous with our resources. Because Neptune's in the mix, maybe go for some all-out escapism. So, you know, drinking session or gambling or spending too much on shopping on things we don't really need. Now, we all enjoy some of these things, so it's all about the proportion, you know, whether it's eating calorific goodies or, you know, going for the drink or doing a bit of they're all absolutely fine. It's just that if we do them from a position of fed-upness and escapism, that's when actually it's not so good. Also, someone close could buzz us for some kind of financial support. And if it has become a little bit of a pattern, it's a good time to remind them that you're not responsible for their finances. So affection and money, or money and enjoyment to an nth degree, can get a bit blurred towards the end of this week. But I think after the week that's come to a close, which really was draining with Mercury and Neptune, Mars in that right angle with Uranus, not easy at all. And I think Mercury moving into Aries, Venus into Pisces, lovely, lovely stuff. The Sun conjunct Neptune could also bring out that part of you that is a natural humanitarian. So, you know, whether it's giving money to a good cause locally, contributing some items to your local food bank, leaving your change in the shop to help, say, a local cause, doing something, you know, planning something like a sponsored run or a sponsored hike or an abseil down the side of your hospital. All those things are possible with the Sun combining with Neptune, to be honest, because you can use your good values in a compassionate and thoughtful way, but vitality may still be a little low. And I think you could be more sensitive to sugars in the second half of this week. But overall, a much brighter week for you. Welcome, Pisces, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 11th of March for the Sun, the Ascendant, or if you choose, the Moon. On the screen now is the event chart as we begin this week. And you can see that the Moon is just still in your sign, having merged with the Sun for the new moon as last week came to a close. Now that's a great start to this week because you're being given an opportunity to really focus on what's important to you, the individual. But there has been a little bit of deflection recently because Venus, the planet of relating, Mars, the planet of passion, and Pluto, the planet of transformation, as you can see, have all been in Aquarius, which is your 12th house. That's a complex area, particularly to have Mars and Pluto in. But the great news is that Venus is going to be joining you as this week begins, later on the 11th. And the reason that that's so good is that Venus loves being in your sign. It's exalted. And Venus in the 12th house can bring some complexities around relationships. Maybe you have been feeling more nostalgic recently. Maybe you've been feeling sentimental. Maybe a relationship has run its course, or certainly there's been some questions that have been asked. So Venus coming into your sign brings you into the present. It doesn't necessarily solve some of the complexities, because Mars was in a warlike clash with Uranus last week, which peaked on Saturday, and they're still in a tense right angle as this week begins. It's possible that some stuff came into the open towards the end of last week that you weren't expecting. Maybe someone had some perspectives or points of view and expressed them in a rather raw way. Maybe it's you that suddenly found there was this welter of emotion that exploded into the open and a lot of frustration within it, particularly if you feel that someone hasn't been as loyal or as supportive or understanding as they may have been. But Venus moving into your sign is going to give you a lot more confidence and assurance. But Mercury, that was in your sign and forged an awkward conjunction with Neptune towards the end of last week, which peaked on Friday, that may have been affecting your physical vitality and even your spirits. As we begin this week, you can see that Mercury's in the next sign to yours, so it's going to be joined pretty quickly on Monday by the moon. And also Mercury has joined up with the North Node and Chiron, which are going to be together in Aries, pretty close together, within 3 degrees for the whole of March. So there's still the opportunity to work on your sense of value, your sense of self-worth. Mercury reinforces that, but also it forges a very positive link to Pluto. So if there has been some wounding stuff, revelations that have suddenly burst into the open, you may have felt that not everybody has been as open, honest, or even supportive, or even as loyal as they may have been. You can start to digest and analyze what's happened in a much clearer way. But Venus moving into your sign and Mercury leaving your sign, as well as the power of the new moon, is going to make you feel a lot better. Now, as this week goes on, the Sun does start to apply to Neptune. There's a cazimi by Sunday. They square with the quartermoon, which is in the part of your situation to do with home, emotion and protectiveness. And it's possible that that may create some complications, because one of the things I find with Pisces people is that you can be so giving, but if it kind of gets taken for granted, it can create such a lot of resentment, and then the bitterness that can then build up bit by bit on the side can see you reach a point where your reaction could be colder and more like that of a very aloof Virgo. So that's a very emotional square on the cazimi at the end of this week. So you may feel a little bit swept away with emotion, find it a bit more difficult to stay grounded, but and Mars is still potentially dragging up stuff from the past, even if you're choosing to think about it or not. Suddenly your emotions can be up and down. That is still going to be a feature of this week. So some of the week gives you the opportunity to really march forwards with those new ideas that are so important to you, the new moon, Venus joining you, having the confidence to recreate your personal presentation in some kind of dynamic way. You can start to do better with your finances with Mercury in the second house. And then as the week goes on, that very inspirational side of your nature, which sees life in such a rich way, you know, you have an ability to soak up all sorts of senses and share them, or use your gifts to help others. So that's really going to be turned up to max towards the end of this week, but it has to be applied to the right situation, or you may feel overwhelmed again and feel that once more you're giving too much to other people. So it is a lot, it seems to me, about having the confidence to focus on what's right for you, the individual, and not feeling guilted out if you're moving away from your old way of being, which was a lot of sacrifice. You're reinventing who you are. Saturn's a big part of that, massive part of it, to be honest. And this is something that you've got to keep going with. But the new moon and Venus are giving you a lot of extra strength to take those next steps forwards. If you would like to ascend above this zodiac broadcast and understand more serious astrology, check out my special chart offer. You can get your forecast and your character analysis for 30% off. Searing insights, totally unique to you. Please see the link beneath this video for more.